on the continent and to identify solutions and frameworks to overcome these problems. What we will try to do is to give the panelists a chance to make opening comments, which will be relatively short, and then after that we'll open for discussions stimulated by the floor. So I'd like to invite the first speaker, but you need to hear the special comments I have to make about my brother, who has been through a lot of things with us in developing the African technical internet community. He has been a pillar without which we would not have reached this far. Dr. Tarek Kamel is a leading African international expert on the development of telecom services and the internet industry. Dr. Tarek is one of the founding board members of Afrinic and has also served as vice president for the Internet Society chapters and on its board of trustees. He has also contributed significantly over the past 20 years to the development of internet in Egypt, in Africa, and in developing countries at large. He previously chaired both the Ministerial Committee on ICT of the African Union and the Executive Bureau of the Arab Telecommunications and Information Council of Ministers. He has served as the Minister of Communications and Information Technology of Egypt for 7 years, and he's currently on the board of the National Telecom Regulatory Authority of Egypt. Please join me in welcoming my brother, Tarek Kamel.
Thank you, my brother Ni, for this kind introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As I said yesterday in another panel, I'm so delighted to be among my friends and my colleagues and many leading figures from Africa and outside Africa in this IGF. It gives me a feeling really of being back home to the global community, interacting with them, not just sitting there on a high-level podium in an opening session and just having to disappear, but I'm there, I'm interacting, and I'm trying to re-engage again. And again, as I have mentioned, this brings me back 20 years back and brings all the nice memories up that we have been doing together in Africa. Many people in this room, among them Nick Wynor and Adiel, but also Pierre Dangenou and Nashwa Abdelbaki and Alan Barrett from South Africa, Jan Kowak from Mauritius, and many leading figures have worked on, since 1992, 1993, on bringing basic connectivity to Africa. This was our dream, this was our challenge, and we took it step by step since the first Birds of Feather meeting, you remember me, in Hawaii in 1995, Birds of Feather, African Birds of Feather meeting back in 1995 in Hawaii. There we have established our first work group, and we were very happy with this work group, just having a an email list, talking to each other and finding each other, identifying each other. And whenever any one of us could identify in another African countries someone who's ready to contribute, who's ready to lead, who's ready to join us in our dream and our aspirations, he was added to the list, introduced, very humble to the others, irrespective whether he's coming from government, he's coming from business, he's coming from NGO. As I mentioned, a wonderful spirit of a bottom-up approach that brought us all this long journey together and made really the foundation of the internet in Africa. And we were so happy when we could ping Botswana, we could ping Nigeria, we could ping Mauritius, we could ping Egypt, we could ping Ghana. This was a dream that they are online and we can ping them and we are able to connect back to them. But I'm asking again, now, those days, those shakers and movers to be up to our new responsibility that I see ahead of us. We still have a long way to go together. And we still to need on access to knowledge. It's not anymore basic connectivity. Basic connectivity is being achieved. There is definitely a lot to do in rural areas and to talk about prices and reducing prices, but I think we have a big mandate of leading really the African continent And this team is really capable of doing that due to its homogeneity, due to its consistency, due to its understanding, common understanding, leading Africa to access to knowledge. And this is not a luxury anymore, because it is very clear, and I realized it also during the work in my government, that the internet infrastructure and local content issues are the basic foundation for a sustainable macroeconomic system. And if we want this continent really to be integrated in the global economy, we need to develop the internet infrastructure further, and we need definitely to invest more and more in local content. There has been a study that I happened to see between OECD and ISOC and as well the UNESCO that speaks about the interrelation between the pull and push and the demand issues on an economic basis related to infrastructure, internet infrastructure, and local content. And again, as I am saying, this is highly related to GDP growth. It has an impact on economy. We need to tackle it as a strategic issues. This is not anymore just the technical issues of pinging that some people from the academia or the business sector or NGOs are doing and happy about to do. No, this is a future of a whole continent, a future of a whole generation, a continent where 50 to 60% are under the age of 30 on the average, a continent that can bring the next billion users to the internet within the next 10 to 15 or 20 years, a continent that will contribute more and more to the global economic growth, and we definitely have our responsibility and our share to work on that. By the way, this study is available online at the OECD site, and it included Kenya and Egypt as examples from the African continent. It has other countries from other places in the world as well. And it's a clear analysis that showed that there is a very clear relation between international internet infrastructure, its pricing, the local domestic internet infrastructure, its pricing for broadband, the development of local content, and as well the development of local infrastructure. And we ought to have economic measures with which we are able really to measure and to compare and to follow up and to trace the growth in those various different relations. And local content, my dear friends, is not anymore, as I said, just something that is considered a luxury. It is important for the social development, for the economic reform, and it is also very important as well for preservation of cultural heritage of this continent, our beloved continent, our languages, our heritage, our roots. All this needs investment in local content and internet infrastructure to be kept. Otherwise, we will have a generation that is living abroad, just thinking abroad. And it is good, definitely, to have communication with the rest of the world. We appreciate that. And we appreciate that our younger generation learns about languages. But that's not enough. They need to know about their own roots as well, their own languages, their own cultures. And this will happen only with robust internet infrastructure on a local level, local exchanges, internet exchanges on a local level, affordable prices, and as well a base that connects Africa together on a regional level, on a very efficient way. Connectivity is important, but quality and affordability as well is highly important. So I see that we need really within the next couple of months to conduct a further study on the analysis of the economic impact of interconnectivity in Africa in order really to foster the investors to invest more in that and to connect Africa with the rest of the world more and more. I see definitely very promising projects for international interconnectivity from CECOM, from Telecom Egypt North, from other players in South Africa and West Africa, but I think this is not enough. We need also to bring on the table, I'm saying it everywhere, Karen Rose did not agree with me that much the other day when we were talking about, but I will still repeat it. I still see that the overall business model that handles international connectivity is unfair. The bigger load is a bigger burden, cost from a cost point of view, is carried by the developing world, is carried by the African countries. We pay the links, the high cost links to connect to the US backbones and to the European backbones, while it is being used in both directions. and this is a significant component of the overall cost of internet connectivity. This should be kept, this should be taken or buried by both partners, similar as it was in the old telephony. It was buried by both by two partners. They are saying sometimes, fine, we invest in US backbones and European backbones, and you need to connect to it. But we have also our local content, and we want to foster it further on. So I think we need to share more and more the cost of the international cost. On a local level, we need liberalization. We need to foster competition, because still national backbones are very expensive by our national telecom operators, and sometimes, unfortunately, more expensive than the international links. My last point is related to cross-border communication and infrastructure. I think this is a growing business also in Africa, and we need clearly to have overall guidelines for regulation of cross-border communication and infrastructure. I need it even in my own country, where we had at some point in time troubles of allowing international cables to go with very low cost and with very seamless and straightforward licensing procedure. So having a guideline that is endorsed maybe by the International Telecommunication Union and by the African Union for cross-border infrastructure, for international cables and submarine cables crossing the borders, even if they are not serving the local country, is highly important, and is something that I am willing to share my experiences, positive and negative experiences in that. By this introduction, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that I have contributed a bit to the conversation, and thank you for inviting me, Adil, and me for this panel again, and look forward to the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. As you can see, experience has a way of bringing many different things together for a common interest, and I really appreciate the observations you made about the economics of the situation. I also appreciate the priority that is access to knowledge that we need to work on. And of course, most important, you should be local and become global. So we need to find a way to marry these things. Thank you very much for this very useful intervention. I think the next on the panel to share initial viewpoints is one that has very recently become quite close to me in our work in related to domain names and so forth. However, he has experience in a different area on projects to interconnect Africa from the African Union. I have in mind Mokhtar Yedali, and he is the head of the newly formed Information Society Division in the African Union Commission. His portfolio includes the development at the continental level of telecommunications, ICT, postal, and broadcasting services and applications. And he will discuss many things, including the program for infrastructure development in Africa, as well as the projects to interconnect Africa. So please join me in welcoming Mokhtar.
Just take this one. Thank you, Chair. In the United States, when you start after somebody who is very brilliant, you say sometimes it is very hard to follow. That's indeed, it is very hard to follow Dr. Tarek after having made such a brilliant presentation. And just for the history, Dr. Tarek was for 2 terms, which is actually 4 years, the chairman of the African Union Commission Conference of Ministers in charge of telecommunication and information technologies. And during his chairmanship, we had to adopt one of the famous and very historical documents, which is the African Union Reference Framework for the Harmonization of Policy and Regulations in Africa. And that serves today as a Bible and for African Union Commission to endeavor to take actually the activities in implementing the projects in Africa. Thank you, Tarek, and again, thank you very much for the community. Right, now, with regard to what I would like to talk about, actually the African Union initiatives are actually very wide and very broad, and I wouldn't one 5-minute session would not allow me actually to go. So I will be literally flying over that due to the time constraint. However, I would just like to mention two things very important. One is the fact that the African Union vision, political vision and economical vision, is to interconnect the continent and to integrate the continent for its unity. In concrete terms, with regard to the ICT, we have three major axes we are working on. One is to interconnect all capital cities by the terrestrial infrastructure broadband. This is actually meeting the Africa Connect goal number 1. Second is to connect all African cities to the CCOM through at least 2 different infrastructure in order to have a resilient network. And third, to implement as much as possible the internet exchange point in order to trigger and to favor the intra-African traffic and reduce the bills we are paying outside of the continent, evaluated above 600 million a year we are paying outside the continent to communicate between us. Having this in mind, the African Union, during a Cairo meeting in 2008, adopted a reference framework to build a master plan for Africa in terms of broadband connectivities, axis around the 3 elements I have already proposed. And then the African Development Bank, the NPCA, NEPAD on that time, and the African Union Commission decided to have a broad program called Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa. It is now a study of 8 million euro that is being carried out by consulting firms from Africa and Europe. The study aims at putting in place an ICT infrastructure master plan up to 2030 with a short, medium, and long-term programs. The study is will be finalized in 2 days actually. We are starting the first validation workshop in Nairobi here for the tripartite and IGAD, and then followed by other one in the Central, Northern, and Western Africa. And the study would be submitted to the summit in 2012, and after that, the ADB, the African Development Bank, and the African Union and NPCA will start the resource mobilization to implement those projects. We are aiming at having a full map of Africa where the missing links have to be put, what kind of infrastructure we have to put, and where we have to put it, and so on. But meanwhile, we have started the issue with regard to the internet exchange points. And there is a project called Axis. This is now actually being implemented also. It is the project aims actually at strengthening national programs and regional cooperation for the deployment of regional internet exchange points. The project is being implemented with the support of the European Union Africa Infrastructure Trust Fund. It will contribute to the optimization and efficiency in the handling of national and regional internet traffics, and hence address the expensive exchange between intra-African via hubs that will be implemented. The other project that we are actually working on will be the Indian project. It is what we call the Pan-African E-Network for Telemedicine and Teleeducation. It's a 100 million USD satellite and fiber optics that is connecting the 53 African countries to provide telemedicine, teleeducation, and therefore internet communication between the head of states and voice and conference services. The other last project I will be actually mentioning to you will be the Africa Connect for Research and Education. It is a 1.8 million euro project aiming at connecting national research and education networks using available ICT terrestrial infrastructure. This is the just a small and the main project that are actually being implemented by the African Union. There is many aiming at interconnecting the continent, but I will not, as I say, go over them. But at this point of time, I will stop here, expecting that I will be having your Q&A, and I will be able to answer in more detail on those initiatives aiming at, again, at interconnecting the continent. Thank you very much.
Well, let's express our appreciation. I am pleased to see that there are programs in place to interconnect the cities, and it reinforces the message from the earlier speaker, Honorable Dr. Tarek. And you've also now brought in the exchange points as another mechanism of keeping the traffic local, thereby reducing costs. So on the whole, it seems like there are some programs in place, but we'll get to discussing how we can accelerate and also, in some sense, begin to adopt it through our own private sector. So we'll get to that. Thank you very much. The next is we have a need to understand the issues of harmonization of various programs and policies in the region. And Dr. Edmond Katiti, who is the acting head of NEPAD E-Africa program of the Africa Union's NEPAD Planning and Coordinating Agency, which is a new agency, I believe. He holds a PhD in Telecommunications Systems Engineering from the University of Essex in the UK. So join me in welcoming Edmond Katiti.
Thank you, Chair. I want to start by saying that the NEPAD Planning and Coordinating Agency has been integrated into the structures and processes of the African Union as the technical body of the African Union. So we work very closely with the new Information Society Division of the African Union Commission based in Addis Ababa, while the NEPAD agency is based in South Africa. But the ICT task team within the NEPAD agency was what was previously the E-Africa Commission, which was set up by African ministers of ICT to try and drive the development of ICTs across the continent. It later became part of NEPAD, the NEPAD E-Africa Commission, and then got integrated into the NEPAD agency fully at the time that the NEPAD agency was being integrated into the African Union. So in the broadband area, we've been working on bridging the infrastructure digital divide, following the same Connect Africa principle of ensuring that every African capital is connected to its neighboring capital through broadband fiber, and then linking the whole of Africa to the rest of the world through submarine cables. To do this, we had to develop an enabling environment which is quite close in many respects with the African Union reference framework and the different guidelines, regulations, and frameworks that have been developed in the various regional economic communities. So what we are doing at the moment, in some respects with the help of institutions like the International Telecommunication Union through its HIPSA project. HIPSA stands for Harmonization of ICT Policies in Sub-Saharan Africa, is to try and ensure that we do not confuse our governments when we talk about one set of guidelines, talk about the Kigali Protocol, and so on. So within the E-Africa Commission, we developed a policy and regulatory framework for the development of the continental cross-border network that would link up African countries. And this was developed because of funding restrictions among 14 countries in Eastern and Southern Africa, and was signed in Kigali, called the Kigali Protocol. We are now working with the various regional economic communities and with the harmonization process to ensure that these non-discriminatory open access principles are accepted across the continent, so that the work of building the cross-border infrastructures are eased. But why are we concerned about building cross-border submarine cable broadband networks? It is because we want to ensure that Africa has abundant, reliable, always on, and affordable communication systems. It is then that Africa can compete with other parts of the world, can start to meaningfully participate in the information society and knowledge economy. Now, one way of doing that, as the previous speakers have indicated, is to ensure that we keep African traffic within Africa. It doesn't need to go to other continents before it comes back. And in the process, we lose a lot of money through transit fees. So if we can build networks that keep African traffic within Africa, there will be a lot of savings. We will free up some of the capacity that is available on the submarine cables and so on to bring us the traffic that is not already within Africa. And part of the policies is to ensure that we maximize existing broadband where it is available at present, whether this broadband has been developed by telecom companies or has been developed by power line companies and other gas pipelines and so on. We try to bring it in and build networks so that we can connect Africa. And our appeal is to encourage more African entities to cooperate with us, to work together so that we can create special purpose vehicles that will realize the dream of Africa. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Edmond. As you can see, he's thrown in a new concept, open access. I didn't do that. He says keep the African traffic local, and he says we should harmonize and create an environment that will do that. He also gave another new interesting thing, encourage more African participation by creating special vehicle mechanisms for that. So I thank you very much for bringing those subjects into discussion. So now we're going to move on to what is actually happening. And we are very pleased to have Julius Opio of CICOM, and he's the regional head of CICOM for East and North Africa. And CICOM provides broadband solutions in Southern and Eastern Africa, to Europe and to South Asia. And he will be addressing the issues of related to CICOM's experience in connecting the region. So welcome, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'll just quickly flip through and take you through what our experience has been in the last two and a half years or so in terms of bringing connectivity to the east coast of Africa. And what we've experienced is there's been a significant growth in terms of internet users in Africa. In the last 10 years, we've noticed that there's been a growth of about 67 million users, internet users, and most of that growth has come about in the last 2 to 3 years. Last mile connectivity is also growing and being upgraded. So we've seen a situation whereby mobile operators are moving from 2.5G to 3G, and now some countries in Africa are even considering deploying 4G networks. And all this has been because of the broadband capacity that is currently available. Another thing that we've been able to experience is internet bandwidth. Prices have dramatically come down, and this is because there's been a significant shift from satellite connectivity to fiber network connectivity in Africa. So satellite is no longer king in Africa anymore, and we're seeing more usage going towards fiber connectivity. And then there's also an area whereby, as a result of many cable companies coming into Africa, diversity is starting to be built within Africa. And as a result of this, resiliency is also improving. Another interesting area is in regards to the governments. What we've noted is that there's more interest. If you look at most budgets, governments are now allocating more funds into ICT. And a good example is the East African community, whereby they've pumped in about $400 million to build national fiber backbone infrastructure. So for example, the East African community is trying to come up with a network whereby they will be able to connect. When I'm talking about East African community here, I'm referring to Rwanda, Tanzania, Burundi, Uganda, and Kenya. They're trying to link their cables in one network, hence lowering the cost of communication by increasing the speed of internet capacity. This is now possible because of the landing of CICOM and other cable companies in Kenya and Tanzania. So the governments have taken a concerted effort to try and even interconnect landlocked countries within the region. Then if you look at the map of CICOM, what we are trying to achieve is whereby our objective was to connect the east coast of Africa and then connect it to Europe and into North America and the Far East. But we are also seeing a situation whereby we are building partnerships with backhaul providers to try and connect landlocked countries in Africa. So far, if you look at our area of focus, it's mainly towards East Coast. But we've also built partnerships, and now we're going into the West Coast, and we're looking at Nigeria as being an area of opportunity for us to provide connectivity. In regards to the market, what has been happening because of broadband, we've seen a communication evolution whereby there's a significant shift from 3G. Now we're going into 4G usage, utilization. The internet has changed also. Before it was just like, it was more of a wide web, but now we are seeing intelligent applications being used on the internet. So we are seeing phone applications, we're seeing social sites coming up, and also transactional content being used on the internet because of broadband capacity. Then also in terms of devices, we are seeing more utilization of mobile devices that from what I would call as a dumb phone to a smartphone, such that now users are now using the mobile devices as their main way to connect into the internet. Unlike 5 years ago, whereby the main device was a desktop computer. Then in terms of regulation, we've seen governments or regulatory authorities in most countries in Africa now being more accessible and giving out more operator licenses when it comes to ICT. An area of interest for us in CICOM is education. So what we've done is to come up with a concerted effort whereby we give what I would say discounted rates when it comes to education. So we've been able to, through our strategic partners, provide capacity to over 75 educational and research institutions in the region. Now, our policy is such that we should try and make education more affordable and accessible by providing ICT connectivity, internet connectivity through ICT initiatives. So what we've done is that we've built networks with the entrants in Africa, and now the entrants in Africa are able to connect into entrants in Europe. And as a result of this, we've seen a dramatic drop on reduction of internet connectivity costs in tertiary and research sectors of education in the region. In terms of future opportunities, and this is mainly, if you look at it from a business angle, we've seen that there's a tendency now for many companies now in Africa looking into content management. There's cloud computing. Cloud computing means here that we're able to have smart, intelligent application systems sitting on the internet and shared across a wide range of users across the world. Then we also have data center opportunities that have come up, business process outsourcing. Governments are now considering and coming up with e-strategies in their governments, in their plans, and this is now being rolled out to the benefits of their respective citizens. We've seen e-health, e-learning, and e-commerce opportunities dramatically being taken up. A good example for e-commerce is that we've seen hubs developed, like in Nairobi has turned out to be a hub for many companies that would like to invest in the region. So as a result of broadband connectivity. In terms of the challenges we are faced with when it comes to deploying connectivity in Africa, what we've experienced is one area that needs to be addressed is cross-border regulation challenges, especially when it comes to no man's land. What happens is because of no man's land is under no government or no country, we have to demarcate operator responsibility. Okay, sometimes this is a challenge because sometimes we have to agree on goodwill, whereby an operator says, okay, fine, I'll deliver capacity, or we will deliver capacity across no man's land to the next country. So that has been an area of challenge. And then another thing is operators across countries do not have similar commercial arrangements and SLAs, hence service delivery is affected. So much as our service delivery could be, let's say 99.9%, but the further you go inland into Africa, the service delivery is diluted. And then another area that we think we should also consider looking into is standardization and regulation of backhaul and last mile connectivity. We are actually currently pushing for a situation whereby we have fiber network infrastructure being shared. What we've experienced is that all our backhaul partners want to deploy their own backhaul networks. So what we are asking now, is it possible for them to come together through a regulatory body and see whether infrastructure can be shared, and as a result bring down the cost for last mile connectivity. And then another area is also fiber networks deployment. How do we connect country to country, town to town, and also urban to rural? What's happening is in the private sector, we are all focused on urban, and very few of us would like to go into rural. So the question is, what do you need to do to generate connectivity in the rural areas, fiber connectivity in the rural areas? So in a nutshell, I think due to lack of time, I've just quickly flipped through the main points that we've experienced so far as SICOM in the region. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And I think we should give him a very special hand. I'll tell you the reason why. Let's give it. You know, he's a good businessman, and that he says the multi-cable, instead of creating competition for him, it creates a more resilient network for him. You see? Which means that he sees it as adding value. And I think I really like to comment on that. And I'm glad that I got that viewpoint from you. We appreciate that you are addressing the cross-border issues, and you recognize some role for governments in stimulating those things. So thank you very much. Yeah, we'll move on to the next activity we have. And this will be shared by Miriki Mureithi, and he's the CEO of Summit Strategies Limited, and he has over 10 years experience in ICT for development consulting in Africa. He is pursuing his PhD on the topic of harmonization of ICT policies and strategies. He has traveled to many countries in Africa on consultancy assignments. In the process, he has acquired special insights into these issues, in particular the status of ICT. He will address the issue specifically on cross-border interconnection policy dynamics. Let's welcome.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for the kind introduction. Good afternoon, all of you. I can see a lot of my friends, and those who are not my friends before will become my friends after this. And I'm looking forward to that. Now, capacity is now available along our coastline, the whole of Africa. For a long time, the East Coast was the only dark part in the world. Courtesy of what my friend has done, now we are connected. Tanzania, Kenya, Somalia, we are now connected, and we can talk with the others. So we have fiber stringing around the continent, and that is good. This comes in the wake of the vision this continent has had for a long time to connect and to interconnect all our countries and all our capitals, as was ably mentioned by my colleague Mokhtar from AU. And this goes back, if we look at the history, as far back as 1996, when Africans working with the UNECA, ITU, and others convened and came up with a framework known as the African Information Society Initiative. And the dream of that was within 15 years, by 2010, all the capitals of this continent will be connected, and in fact, go down to the villages. 2010 has come, but I doubt whether we have been able to achieve that vision. However, it is still very critical. 2007, we had the leaders again meeting in Luanda and came up with the African Connect in 2007, again restating the same vision. And also we heard about the reference framework, and I'm happy that Dr. Tarek is here, who authored, who supported the development of this. So all these are initiatives to us to achieve this goal. Now we have the fiber. The challenge is that how do we drive this fiber into the hinterland, into the landlocked countries? Julius has mentioned about the initiatives of the initiative of SICOM to go inland. Now, the latest research by Hamilton Research indicates that with all the effort that we have put in place, and if we complete what is being planned, we'll be able to get 46% of our citizens, that's about 388 million Africans, within 25 kilometers of fiber. So we still have a lot of work to do. We still have 54% of our colleagues in Africa very far away from fiber and therefore benefiting from that. And the challenge of this is mostly as we go further in the hinterland. And one of the issues is the question of connectivity, cross-border connectivity. Now, working with the UNECA, UNECA starts to do a research to look at what are the issues that prevent us being able to address the issues of cross-border connectivity. This research was carried out 2 years ago, looked at Eastern African region, 13 countries, and so we have come up with, out of the research, we found 4 areas that we have to address for us to realize the vision. These 4 areas, one is political. There are political issues that we have to address. We also have to address, as point number 2, regulatory and ICT policy issues at the national level. There are technical issues that have to be addressed, and some of them were mentioned by Julius, talking about the SLAs as we go inland. And also, it must also make business sense. So if you look at the political issues, one of the things we found in our study is that it is very critical that we address cross-border political issues, relationships. If we have political antagonism across the countries, then we cannot even start talking about building fiber. We cannot talk about connectivity across the borders. We also saw cases whereby the internal conflict of one country is so bad that it also affects the ability for the operators to build the necessary infrastructure. And worse still, if it is one of the countries where we need to go across that country to the other country, it means we are already locked out even before we start. So politics plays a big role. We also saw cases whereby countries want to assert their own sovereignty. And as they do this, asserting their own sovereignty, they forget that they are part of a global village and they have to work with other countries. But by asserting their sovereignty, then sometimes they influence the construction, cross-border connectivity, and also therefore affecting the neighboring countries. We also saw cases whereby some countries impose taxes, and these taxes will have an effect on the cost of those services across to the other country. And then, of course, in some countries, we had cases whereby the infrastructure is so poor that even when we talk about across Africa connectivity, it will have to be very, very expensive. It has to be a lot of work to be able to upgrade that infrastructure to help us in the cross-border connectivity. At the technical level, part of it has been mentioned by Julius. I won't mention it. But the issue here we found is that we need to think about cross-border technology choices that is acceptable by both parties, and that the countries themselves have got the capacity. The countries sometimes do not have the capacity to implement and support some of these networks. At the regulatory level and the policy issues, we found cases whereby the national regulatory framework is inhibiting for development of competitive infrastructure. There was no mechanism in some countries, in most of the countries, that could stimulate cross-border relationships, cross-border development of connectivity links. And then some countries are still struggling with reform, not yet complete. And of course, think about licensing. For you to operate across the other country, you need authorization. We call it a license. Do we have mechanisms where you as an operator like Julius, for example, would be given a license to cut across many countries. The operator will have to get licenses in every country as you go. And even in the case of East African community, we are still struggling with that. Finally, one point we found is that even if we address the political issues, we address the technical issues, and we also address the cases of regulatory framework, it must still make business sense for the operators to do business of cross-border. And so the issue arose, are our markets viable? Are those cross-border markets we are talking about, are they viable? And so that is the first thing that will stimulate the development of cross-border connectivity. And in this case, we are talking about demand at regional level, at sub-regional level, and also what is the business environment? How long do I take to get the licensing? How long do I take to go through all the processes to start? And so we need to address those four issues for us to realize the beautiful, beautiful vision that we have put for ourselves as ARIA's 1996 African Information Society Initiative, the African Connect, this reference framework done by Dr. Tarek was here. We need to think about how we are going to address all those issues. But one thing I'm happy is that there's a lot of initiatives at the political level, at the business level. We have seen some of the operators doing that. And then specifically AU, ITU, there's been a lot of initiatives allowed it. We also have the private sector also trying their own. And hopefully through this, we are not only going to do this cross-border connectivity, but we are also going to bring the broadband closer to the 54% who are still very far away from that elusive fiber that we want for getting our African brothers and sisters into the global village. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
For him. You know, he always surprises me, and so I must just comment. The observation is correct. If you don't have the political environment in a good form, we can't do too much. On the other hand, he also reminds us that we kept trying. We kept trying, and I think that's the real spirit, not so much the vision. The vision is to get me moving. So I'm just so glad that you've put these two difficult issues together, and that is my observation I see it. Now we're moving on to the last of the initial comments, and it's a little different, but it's also addressing the issue raised very early by Dr. Tarek Kamel, which is directly addressing the issue of content. Anyway, we have with us Andrew Austin from Ubuntu Net Alliance. Andrew Austin is the Chief Technology Officer of the Tertiary Education Network, TENET, of South Africa, and Network Development Manager for the Ubuntu Net Alliance. Ubuntu Net Alliance is the regional research and education network for Eastern and Southern Africa. And he will be addressing the issue of Ubuntu Net project and how it's been helping Africa. You have the floor. Let's welcome.
Many thanks. First of all, thank you very much for having me here today. It's great to be back up in Africa. I always enjoy my travels around Africa, and I find such warm and friendly people here. And I really find that every time I'm at one of these conferences, I learn so much from the people that I spend so much time with. And, you know, when we look at the market as it is today, particularly in academia, I think that that becomes key. We have a lot to learn from each other, but we need the communications to do it. Now, one of the problems that I've seen in the past is, yes, coming from South Africa, we've got fairly good infrastructure inside TENET, nice 10 gig network, in fact 700 gig network, lots of international bandwidth, but when it comes to dealing with the rest of Africa, there the connectivity suddenly disappears. There is a very, very low bandwidth crossing the border. And this is something that has to be fixed. I know that Mioli, who's sitting over there from Kenet, our colleagues from the Kenyan network, we've been talking for a long, long time about connecting Kenya to South Africa via an undersea route to stop the traffic going via Europe. The economics of it, though, who's going to pay for it, and what traffic is there going to be on this circuit? So at the end of the day, you've got to find a way to connect the countries in Africa, but you've got to make it business sensible to do so. And that was something that came up, that I picked up on fairly clearly here, is that it's got to be business sensible to do cross-border circuits in Africa interconnections. Now, we're all talking about creating content on the continent, and this is what is so important, because if you don't have the content, you're not going to get it to be economically viable to build a cross-border circuit. Let's face it, we talk about the fact that as Africa, we pay for the circuits coming from Europe and going to Europe. The fact is that Africa is still very much an eyeball continent. We pull traffic towards us. We are not feeding traffic out. And that's kind of bizarre considering how empty our outbound pipes sit. If you look at an average internet pipe into Africa, you're probably doing a 5-to-1 inbound to outbound ratio. Now at that point, who's going to pay for that pipe? The guy who's pulling all the data across it. And so this is why it becomes so important to generate content. To generate content, however, you need a very wide base of people. And the academic sector has the facilities to generate masses of content. If I look at the Hartbeespoort Radio Astronomy in South Africa, I see them streaming to the Netherlands for academic purpose when they're doing EVLBI experiments. 48 hours at a time, 1.2 gigabit a second, flat traffic. And I mean, they run that circuit flat at 1.2 gigabit a second for 48 hours at a time every couple of months. The SKA, square kilometer array, if it's awarded to Africa, will generate hundreds of gigs of capacity and traffic and data that's got to go outside. At that point, we've got the content. But again, this requires more than just one country and one cross-border circuit. It requires the inland countries to have the access. Look at the SKA goes up from South Africa, parts of it into our bordering countries, some of which are landlocked. They're going to need connectivity back into South Africa. And so, with all of that in mind, the UbuntuNet Alliance was formed as an alliance of African academic networks that got together and decided to cooperate in a regional network, similar to the Dante and Géant networks in Europe, which interconnect the NRENs and allow the NRENs to also help each other. Within that UbuntuNet Alliance, there was then a project formed called Africa Connect, which the European Union and the European Commission via Dante very kindly agreed to fund. Well, they're funding 80% of it to the tune of about 12 million euros. 3 million euros is coming back out of Africa from the NRENs themselves. And that project is there to build cross-border connectivity. That's all that we're trying to do, is connect the NRENs. We are not building NREN networks within that project. We are connecting NRENs. The objective for that is that when you look at countries like Malawi, and you look at countries like Rwanda and Uganda, who don't have a coastline and can't get easy access to a landing station to buy cheap connectivity, they can also get access to both the NREN content on the rest of the UbuntuNet Alliance network and cheap international connectivity. Now, I can tell you 15 million euros might sound like a lot of money. As we're discovering, 15 million euros, it's not a huge amount of money. It doesn't go terribly far. And the other thing is, when you go out into the market at the moment and you ask for proposals and you say, guys, we're putting out this tender, respond. Guess what? You might get one limited group of operators that respond. But there are vast numbers that will look at this, take one look at your budget and go, not even going to answer, not even going to come and ask for the tender document and show an interest in it. They don't even ask. So there is almost it is a huge challenge to get the providers out there to come and respond. And I'm appealing to every provider. There is a journal notice out. Respond to it. We want to do business with you. But the business case has to be right. We understand that. And what I'm saying is this is not an easy road going ahead, but it's an important one. And the simple fact is that as you build the cross-border circuits, the traffic levels do increase. I'll give you an example. One of the things that Tenet does as an academic network to reduce our transit cost is we peer with everybody. We deliberately push as much content onto the commercial market as we possibly can because it keeps us peered, it keeps us interconnected, and as such it drives down our transit costs. Now, because the network has masses of capacity and masses of bandwidth, and we have masses of content, we are pushing out loads of content. And I can watch where that content's going to. I remember looking at the traffic levels in Zimbabwe and in Namibia and in Botswana for certain types of content. And then we started pushing traffic to their upstream provider who did have cross-border connectivity. The traffic levels on certain types of interactive content, largely hosted by our favorite search provider, have gone up in the region of anywhere between 50 and 300% overnight at no cost increase. I see providers starting to offer promotions in South Africa for free access to certain content where they don't bill it as part of data capping because the content is local. But the moment that the content is local and the cross-border circuits are there, and I need to stress that the circuits have to be there, the costs will come down. So you're in a catch-22. You've got to have the circuits, you've got to have the contents to make the circuits viable. And it is a catch-22. So somewhere the initiative has to come. And so yeah, that's kind of what we're doing with UbuntuNet, trying to build a network that connects 15 countries in Africa. We've had some success. There are indications that there are fiber networks in the ground. It's now a matter of getting access to them. There is fiber there. Do not let anyone tell you the fiber does not exist. I've seen the maps. The fiber exists going from South Africa to Zimbabwe to Zambia, into Tanzania, from Tanzania into Kenya, into Uganda, into Rwanda, into Burundi. It is there. It is in the ground. It is now up to the operators to give us access to that fiber at a reasonable price. So, yeah.
Thank you. That's another one, chicken or the egg. We want both. Anyway, I think the relation is very interesting, and we appreciate the role of academic networks in contributing to the content, and therefore to start the cycle of development in that area. Okay, I think we've now reached the point where now it's you in the audience, and you've heard the different viewpoints from the vision all the way to the implementation, including the policy issues we have to address. So it's up to you to raise some questions. So the floor is open, it's yours. Yes, Chris? I'll take 5, so don't worry.
Chris from ISOC. Thanks to the panel. That was a really good, detailed discussion. And my question to Julius, some of the war stories in cross borders, getting across, can you share any of those? Thank you.
Not yet. I'll take a few more, otherwise it's... yes, I saw... yes, ma'am. If you can just mention your name so I can have a sense.
Are you okay? Yeah. Okay. I'm Jane Muriaki. I'm from the Network for Non-Formal Educational Institutions. And, you know, my question and my concern is about access to internet, specifically for, you know, the low-income society. Because when you're starting the program, our program actually is providing basic education, that's secondary education, to children in the slums. And what you're doing is that we're using video conferencing and connecting to about 16 centers across the slums in Nairobi. One of the challenges that you know, we faced when we went to the ISP providers and asked them for a solution, they were like, wow, can the slum people afford to pay for the internet, you know. And, we kept on going from one provider to another until we got to the third one who was able to give us a solution. But still, it's very, very expensive. And we're looking for ways and hoping that it would be made, cheaper by the end of the day. Again, the question of content is still another challenge because, as we explore on the issue of content at that particular level, basic level, we still find that, it's quite expensive to get content from outside, and that gives us a challenge to be able to generate local content. A challenge to our government, again, because as a Minister of Education, KIA in particular, NEC, again, they must embrace technology and be able to release content and to digitize it for purpose of being utilized by institutions or organizations that are coming up with initiatives that are going to provide education for all. Those are my concerns. And as we talk about infrastructure, I think it has to go hand in hand with usage. How do we make as many people as possible use the infrastructure that we are putting across? Thank
you.
My name is Dean Mlozi from Zambia. I work with the telecenter networks in Southern Africa. My question is to Morioki Morethi and Dr. Edmund Katiti. I'm worried about the 54% gap we're talking about in terms of access. And we are talking about long-term strategy in order to reach this goal. What are the short-term measures that you think you may commend? And on the side of Edmund Katiti, the policy measure that, especially on the HIPSA, what is really this program entails in terms of policy harmonization and the environment, in terms of infrastructure and so on? Thank you.
We do have a question from our remote participants from the Hub of Cameroon. Emphasize the grouping of countries to form an effective force, encourage the countries of the sub-regions to commit to join together to build their interconnection, that they do not only have to make declarations at these summits and meetings. For example, at the output of this IGF, two neighboring countries can take the commitment of their interconnection. Janvier Engoulet from ISOC Cameroon chapter.
Merali Kashorda from Kenneth. Maybe a comment, maybe a question. I see that the business case is the real problem with the traffic. As I listen to many of the initiatives, is it true that we don't really have a strong initiative on content development? Because if you develop content, right now we are interconnected. Even if we interconnect through London, we are interconnected. So if we just focus on content, then the business case will just come up. Is that the case? Is that the way the panelists see it?
I would like I'll come back. I would like my panelists to respond, but I'll let all of them choose to make any comment that they see fit related to the subject. But I'll just want to start with Julius because his name was mentioned first. So please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I think the question was in regards to the cross-border stories and our horror stories, what we've experienced. It's very interesting in the sense that sometimes what happens is we're able to get our partners to deliver capacity at the border point. But what we know is that some of our countries have what we call no man's land, whereby it's about 800 meters to, let's say, a kilometer. So what normally happens is we have to go into long-term negotiations with operators from both countries and try and see how we can convince either party from one side to do the no man's land portion, okay, and carry it across to the other country. What normally happens, it looks very simple technically, but from a government point of view, it's complicated. So when you have regulatory organizations in each and every government or country coming up with regulations, you'll find that part of the border has not been addressed. So they have to go back and get approvals from their respective governments, and that takes time. And to address no man lands is quite tricky also from a business point of view in terms of risks. Okay, how do you make sure that whatever you're investing there is insured? In case of an outage, who is supposed to, which party from which country is supposed to go and address the outage at the no man's land? So our experience has been more of a learning experience. That's how I would put it. And in East Africa, if you look at the Kenya-Uganda situation, it has been quite successful. If you look at Uganda, Rwanda, also that has been okay. However, when you look at it in terms of how long it takes to resolve the issue, I think it's something if we could all come up together with a solution and address it in terms of, from a policy perspective. And when it comes to what I would call microwave connectivity, there is no issue because it's clearly straightforward, right? So in a nutshell, that's what I would say has been our experience.
Okay, good anyway. Yeah. Mark?
Just to supplement what has been said, one of the component actually PIDA is tackling will be all transboundary infrastructure. And the way we see that any link that we suppose it's part of the regional communications to integrate the regions or the country as identified as such must have a protocol for the transboundary ownership, governance, and so on with regard to that infrastructure that is crucial for interconnecting Africa.
Edmond?
Thanks. I was asked for a specific question on what is HIPSA. HIPSA is an African Union project implemented with the help of the International Telecommunication Union as a technical body, and it is to do with harmonization of ICT policies. I think a good example is in the ECOWAS region. They recently, I think last year, came up with guidelines for landing submarine cables. We do not have to go through the same process in other regions. We can learn from that experience and help the other regions adopt similar guidelines or regulations. So the part one of HIPSA has ended, and we have requested the European Union to extend the project to HIPSA 2 so that we can get more done with this harmonization business. Thanks.
Marie, you can, okay, go ahead. But everybody will get a chance.
Just again to supplement this regard to the HIPSA, since we do have in each of the regions guidelines for the harmonization of policy and regulations in the regions, and at the continental level, HIPSA will mainly, one of those is to help the countries to transpose at the national level those guidelines, and they differ from region to region with regard to the specific topic on the harmonization of policy and regulations in the continent.
Ricky? Yes.
So for the 54% who are very far away from the fiber, are there short-term measures to address them? I talked about 4 factors that we found in our research that are critical for this to be successful. I talked about political, regulatory, technical, and business. As you all agree with me, political is even outside the scope of the ICT people. And when a government says we are not going to liberalize the telecommunications sector, and you know the countries like that, then now that is outside the purview of what we as people in the telecommunications sector can do. Perhaps Dr. Tariq Kamel can tell us a bit more from the political perspective. But when a country decides it's not going to go that route, to open up the market, to bring up competition, to allow for competition, it is more or less very, very difficult to talk about, very difficult to talk about some short-term measures. So the same case goes around regulatory. So the government must take a decision to open up the market, and once that happens, then we are left about technical and business. And those ones, there are ways to go around it. For example, should it be a problem of technology, we can talk about, instead of the fiber, there are wireless solutions that will be able to take us closer to the people we need to serve. When you talk about the business case, there are cases whereby the governments have said, and many of them in Africa have said, we are pulling out of the telecommunications sector, we want the private sector to come in. And the private sector have come in with a number of players. But these private sector have gone to the capitals, they have gone to the cities, and they have forgotten our brothers and sisters in the rural areas. So what has happened? The same marginalization we had before, again, is replicated by the private sector. And so what we are seeing is that in such a case, some governments have gone back and said we want the private sector to do business, but now we are realizing they are not able to, they are not addressing that the group of people in the rural areas. And so a country like Kenya, the government has gone out to the rural areas and built fiber, which was mentioned by Julius, national optic fiber back 5,000 kilometers, and is doing that. So there are a number of interventions the government can do when the first issue of political and regulatory are addressed. In terms of business, we need a business case, and I would like to insist, or rather suggest, or rather from empirical data, that content is king. Content is one major driver to define the use value, and once you define the use value, then the business case is there. Thank you.
I'd just like to comment on the content is king issue as well as the business case. Merely as you commented, we are already connected. But I'm going to tell you a story. There's an STM1 that runs from Kenya to South Africa. Currently has no traffic on it. It did at one point when a Kenyan operator did a deal with a South African operator to reach the Johannesburg Internet Exchange and feed the Kenyan routes onto the Johannesburg Internet Exchange and vice versa. And the South African operator said, okay, well, we're going to charge you a relatively low amount for the local loop back from the data center where that STM1 runs to the Johannesburg Internet Exchange. But if we feed you all of the content through the Johannesburg Internet Exchange, including what is on the Tenet network, your STM1 is not going to be enough. And they said, well, we'll give 50 meg to this because we're sure 50 meg will be enough. Well, we turned it up. That STM1 saturated in 4.5 minutes. Completely, totally saturated. At that point, the Kenyan operator in concern who ran it said, okay, we acknowledge we can get content from South Africa, but if we go to the London Internet Exchange, because of the lack of local loop and because of the fact that the circuit itself terminates in a data center where the London Exchange is, it's not economically viable to get it from South Africa. Thanks, but no thanks, and they turned it off. And as a result, the 78 millisecond latency path to South Africa that did exist at that point, which should have helped promote the business case, is now back up to the 400 milliseconds that we see today between South African networks and Kenyan networks. And when I say that the difference in price was minimal, you're talking $2-3 a megabit. Yes, $2-3 a megabit, that's not a lot of money when you're saving on half your latency and doubling your user experience. Your business case has to come from more than just your rands and cents. Yes, economically it has to be sensible, but it also has to be driven by your user experience. The fact is that if a user's got good access to video content, they're going to use more of it and you're going to sell more. And that's what the providers need to wake up and see. It's not just the base rands and cents. Sometimes you've got to spend money to make money.
Thank you. Just two quick comments. One on the content issue that seems to be popping up heavily during this discussion. If we observe what has happened in the technology within the last couple of years, the tools are becoming more and more available for content creation, preservation, distribution, and dissemination. They are becoming more and more price effective and affordable and more powerful. We need to encourage user-created content more and more on an African level, and building communities in Africa that use the local content and between Africa and Africans that live abroad. In order to do that effectively, commenting on the comment of the gentleman from Kenya, we need to measure things. Because something that you need to develop, you need to be able to measure it and to compare the development from year to year. So we need to see what type of registrations under the African CCTLDs happen in local content. We need to see the Wikipedia pages in local content in our local languages, the blogs in our local languages, and to compare them year by year, and to compare them with the amount of traffic that is coming in and out of the country in terms of IP addresses, international traffic, number of autonomous systems, and metrics like that. So this needs serious work on an economic basis in order really to be able to foster it and to push it in the future. Concerning the comment of Mr. Miruki about the governments, I think that governments are now more receptive. They are ready more and more to listen. I have sensed that during my work in the ministerial conference in the African Union. The problem is sometimes they don't want to speak out that they need help, that they are embarrassed to say it. So we need as a community to go and approach them with the solutions, because they see that it is not proper that they come out and see that they don't know how to lead the way in this or that, in that aspect of liberalization. So I think we need to be more aggressive and more communicative as a community. We are a strong community, and we have our outreach and we have our influence, and we are able to influence more and more the decision makers in the government, and to help them really in what they might want to do, but they don't know how to do it and who will pay for it. So I see there a positive change, and I can really help in that if there are any initiatives in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, time is not on our side, so I can only take two questions and a comment. And the comment is from him, but two other questions. Otherwise, we'll not live within. Well, I will take the comment from the CEO of Afrinic first.
Okay. It is a comment and a question as well. So, yeah, the comment is about what Andrew just said about the user experience. I think that is critical in investing in internet connectivity business, because more users are at their ease using the net, more they will use it. There is no doubt about that. We have seen it for mobile. The mobile internet is developing because people see it more easy for them to use their mobile to access the data, which they have difficulty. So that is something important. My question was about the dark fiber and all the initiative that other institutions like African Union and NEPAD are doing. If we already have fiber there, interconnecting country, but there is no traffic on those data, that means a huge part of the work is done. I mean, that's the biggest part. How can policy come and help the use of those dark fiber to achieve the goal of the interconnection? I think that is something which may need to look at. Third is a comment and also an acceptance of support. Afrinic has created since 2009 a government working group. This is not something usual, but we have created a government working group where we are trying to establish that dialogue between the technical community, I mean Afrinic specifically, and government. For now, our closed meeting, where we meet government and discuss issue and try to explain so that they can have. So I think we are here calling for government to join more of this thing, and Dr. Tarek will be very happy to work with you on that so that we can have a more conducive environment and try to address those issues as technical community to help things to move. Thanks.
Yes.
My name is Davis Edaka. I'm CEO of Elimu Holdings Limited. I want to make, to give a question or part comment also on the business of content, because we know that connectivity is redundant if there's no content, but content does not exist, it's not used if it's not relevant to the end user. But at the end of the day, somebody has to make this business make sense. In our case, for instance, we build websites for schools. About 229 schools in Kenya today have websites through our company. And we try to make business out of that. The number of people or the percentage of the population that can understand this business, the business of content, is very limited in the country or in this region. So my question is, like every other business, whatever it sells, whatever commodity, soap, sugar, wheat, whatever, selling content or developing content for a business case will face the same challenges as developing soap or wheat for sale. So if a very small percentage of the population understands this business, and this is only among maybe very young people, what kind of steps can any country or can any government take to make sure that these businesses developed by these very young people are going to survive, yet we know that the cases of businesses going down are very low? What can be done?
Well, I think I will have to close the questions, unfortunately, because there's not enough time. So what we'll do now is I'd like to give the panelists a chance to make their closing remarks, no more than, based on the clock, no more than 2 minutes. So I start from my left.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the inputs of my colleague and the audience, the questions and comments. I think what this proves is that there is a lot of interest in developing the whole of the internet ICT sector on the continent, and that there is a need to work together, the private sector, the academia, the governments, regional economic community, so that we can realize the vision of Africa. And I encourage us to keep interacting whenever we have opportunities like this and others coming, the ICANN meeting in Dakar, the ITU meeting in Geneva, World Summit, and so on. Thanks.
Mokhtar?
Just before closing, I just want to supplement what the CEO of Afrinic was saying, that yes, our first assessment actually in the African Union, and I received the map only 2 days ago, linearly speaking, there is African countries are interconnected by fiber. The list I have gotten so far is 34 missing links that need to be implemented to have the full mesh. But that's what I call the linear map. In fact, most of this fiber is not provided to the end users. They cannot access this because of the policy, because of the monopoly, because of the club among operators. On those kind of issues, that will be the issue that will be really facing. Do we have to bypass that infrastructure and rebuild another infrastructure, which is actually a waste of time and resources? Shall the government, as you say, the policy makers intervene in enforcing the open access as per se, and see that will be answered by the end of October. Each of the region concerned by this will certainly make the specific recommendation to the policymakers and to the project implementation team to see what kind of attitude to have toward those existing fiber that are not given access to by the owners and the operators themselves. Having said that, I would just like to say thank you to everybody for having the time to bear us and to support us with regard to that, to our interventions. Within the African Union activities, a lot of things has not been said here. We didn't say it. We just flew over everything. But believe me, the African Union Commission is now moving from more, how can I say, operational institutions that it really involved in the activities, and we count a lot of the support of the communities, the users, the policymakers at all levels, in order to make sure that we will be having a coherent infrastructure and policy built for the continent.
Thank you. I think in my closing remarks, I'll respond to some of the questions, is that an area that we need to address which was raised by one of the participants here, is access to, how do we provide access to low-income users? Currently, if you look at all the deployment that's happening, it mainly focuses on what I would say high-income users, but we think that there's an opportunity for us to go into public-private partnership to address low-income users and also people in disadvantaged areas like in rural areas. And that is where now we should go beyond the business case and say, okay, fine, what do we want to achieve from a social perspective? So that's an opportunity for us to address. When it comes to content, as somebody mentioned here, it has to be relevant. But the opportunity for us is there has to be a need behind it. Currently, if you look at Africa, one of the needs that we have is education. And so education shall continue being a critical driver when it comes to content management and provision of content. And then possibly also health, because you also have partners who are looking into that area of providing health content. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity today. Thank you.
In the last 5 years, Africa has done well. That is when you had the fiber inland, fiber across along the sea. And we have therefore achieved the 46% linkage to our population. That is good. But you still have another 54% to go. I urge you, let us roll back our sleeves and work hard that in the next few years, we have got all the 54% also connected. Thank you.
First of all, thank you, everybody who's here, to the panelists, the other panelists, and to everybody in the room. In my closing remark, I'd also like to say that in the last 5 years, 6 years, I've seen amazing things happen on this continent. I've seen traffic levels rising by 2,000% on our network alone, thanks to cost cutting, due to deregulation, and due to the fact that there is more freedom to operate and more competition. I pray that it comes to the rest of the African continent. The amount of deregulation, I hope to see more and more cross-border circuits. And I really believe that if we work together as a continent, we can do amazing things. And the proof of that is in the rising traffic levels. Even if I look at the Kenyan traffic levels, I see over a gigabit a second today flowing to the Kenyan academic network. That was 155 meg less than a year ago, I believe. So that's a 10-fold growth in under 12 months. It's now time to start getting the traffic flowing between our countries and start working together as countries instead of working in islands. And I believe if we do that, we'll achieve great things. So, yeah, thanks again.
Thank you. Last word from Dr. Tarek Kamel.
Thank you very much, Ni, and thank you everybody for joining us in this wonderful panel. And indeed, I sense from the discussion that we have a consensus today that we are moving now in Africa into a new phase, into a new era, a phase out now of access, which meant basic connectivity, to access, which will mean access to knowledge and access to information. Content is the driver for economic growth and infrastructure growth, and vice versa. It's a push-pull relationship that is very clear. Therefore, I am ending up with a recommendation. If you might agree, I'm inviting AFRINIC with the African Union and any other players, maybe ISOC, who can help us in doing together a study about the relation of content in Africa and infrastructure from an economic point of view, analytically, as well as from technical point of view, and come up with clear recommendation to present to the decision makers in government and in business that really reflects our recommendation that let's invest in content more and more, let's invest in public services more and more in terms of e-government and e-health and education. This will foster connectivity, and this will bring benefits as well to our African population. So this is my recommendation, and this is the invitation and conclusion that I am ending with. Thank you very much again for joining us and for inviting me for this wonderful gathering.
Well, please, let's thank our panelists. And I also think we should thank ourselves, because a lot of the stimulating questions came from the audience. So I really appreciate that. As usual, the time goes very fast when it's very interesting. So we've gotten to the end, and I wouldn't want to hold any further summary or any further conclusion. I think it's been summarized by the panel. So I thank you very much for being part of this opportunity of interconnecting Africa. Thank you.